city staff to reevaluate a proposal without those kinds of units. We'll talk to Surrey Councillor Pardeep Kooner, and we'll take your calls. Plus, how the housing crisis makes things worse for victims escaping intimate partner violence. That's after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. After significant pushback from dozens of South Surrey residents, City Council there has now voted to block supportive housing and complex care elements of a housing proposal in that neighborhood. The proposed complex is located near the Semiahmoo Mall. It's a collaboration between Fraser Health, BC Housing, and the City of Surrey. It does include non-market affordable rentals, but it also includes 40 supportive housing units and 20 complex care units. And it's those units that residents are opposed to, saying they're concerned about safety, its potential to attract drug users, and the site's proximity to schools and other amenities. Now, last night, Council voted to send back the proposal to staff and see if it could go ahead, but without those supportive or complex units. And last night, councillors did echo sentiments by residents who were opposed. Here's what Surrey Mayor Brenda Locke, councillors Harry Baines, Linda Annis, and Doug Elford had to say.
The 202 non-market rental units in this proposal respond to a very real need in our city, and council is prepared to only support that component. And but supportive housing and complex care housing are quite different. The people that require supportive housing and complex care are some of the most vulnerable residents in our province, and they require intensive wraparound services, 24/7 supports, and careful consideration of where those services and supports are located.
But I can't support that portion of the project that enables illegal drug use. I believe that we should be providing assistance to those who suffer from addiction. We should be providing them safe spaces to help them stop using drugs, not giving them a safe place to use illegal drugs in our neighborhood.
It has weighed heavily on me because I certainly support affordable housing, and I think we need to build a lot more of that. But there's no room for drug use within these affordable housing units. People that are in recovery, that are around active drug use, it's not good. It doesn't help neighborhoods. It's not the right thing to do.
This proposal blends families with children and low barrier tenants in the same building. This is a concept that I can't support.
So on the question, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you, that's carried.
That's Mayor Brenda Locke and councillors Harry Baines, Linda Annis, and Doug Elford. As you heard, the decision was met with applause in the council chambers when councillors, all of them, raised their hand in favor of having the proposal looked at again without those units. Now, BC's Housing Minister Christine Boyle was unavailable to join us here on the show, but she spoke to reporters this morning.
Of course, I'm disappointed. We know that supportive housing and the health supports connected through complex care make a huge difference in people's lives, and they allow us to bring people out of unsafe encampments and off the street to connect them to mental health supports, addiction supports, and more. It makes a difference for those individuals and the whole community. So we'll be connecting with Surrey to follow up and see what the next steps are.
It sounds like the project's not dead, they're just sending it back to staff. So is there anything that people in the community had raised about that project that you share their concerns about, or do you think that the council should have just approved it?
We want to make sure that people have good and accurate information. I know there's always a lot of fear and sometimes misinformation about projects like this, and so it's important that we work with Surrey and work with BC Housing to make sure people understand how important this housing is, the services that it provides, and the difference that it will make, and then we can navigate the next steps together.
Were you seeing misinformation about this particular project that concerned you?
No, there's always fear, understandably, that comes up for people about housing that may be new in the neighborhood, and it's an important part of our work to make sure that they understand the health supports, the security supports that will be in the building to support people and the neighborhood.
Are there circumstances where your ministry would override council in any cases? I know that you can do that in municipalities that have the oversight, like they're on the so-called naughty list, but can you do that for municipalities that are not on that list?
Surrey has been a good partner on housing and delivering supports, and so we want to work with them, find ways to talk and figure out the next steps together.
That's Housing Minister Christine Boyle this morning at the legislature. We're taking your calls. What do you think of the decision by Surrey City Council? And is supportive or complex care housing needed in Surrey and other BC communities? And where do you put them? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And if you're joining us on TikTok, you can leave a comment there. And joining me now is Surrey City Councillor Pardeep Kooner. Good afternoon, Councillor. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What does this mean for the project then? Is it dead or can it still move forward?
I'm hoping it's going to move forward. We're willing to work with BC Housing. Council is always very supportive of providing below market units for our residents, and we know that they're needed all throughout the city. So I'm hoping BC Housing will work with the City of Surrey to deliver on and keep that promise of adding below market rentals.
And what about the elements of complex care and supportive housing? Is that part of it essentially dead then?
That's what council is hoping based off of that unanimous vote that happened last night. I will say also that the City of Surrey has 14 spaces that have complex care and safe injection sites. And from what we've seen, I did hear the minister's comments, but from what we've seen from from January of 2021 to this past September, over 4,600 calls have been attended by the Surrey firefighters in relations to these 14 units. So I don't think the fear comments are appropriate for the minister have made. These are actual facts. We've had to deal with situations arising within these 14 areas within the city that have complex care and safe injection sites. So I will not say that the South Surrey residents' fears were unfounded, and they were based on fact.
What is your understanding of how this complex care and supportive housing aspect, how those particular units would have worked?
I'm struggling to understand how they would have worked myself. I stand with the residents of South Surrey. They all are very extremely supportive of having below market rentals. And when we went into this project, that's what we were advocating for. At no point has council advocated for below market rentals and complex care being situated in the same location.
In Surrey, as you mentioned, there are already some sites in Surrey that provide harm reduction, and that there have been these calls there. The fire department has been called there. Does that not illustrate the need for supportive housing, where there are services, there is housing essentially for people to stay in and be able to access those wraparound services? Isn't that just an example that says, yes, we do need this kind of housing in our community?
Well, we 100% agree that we do need it. We don't believe that it should be included, though, with the below market rentals. These are going to be families. There's going to be young children. There's going to be seniors. And I don't think putting them in the same building is appropriate. If BC Housing came forward or Fraser Health came forward with another proposal, then I would want to look at that separate from this. We're not against providing housing for everybody that needs it, but it should not be included in the same type of housing that has children and seniors in it.
My understanding from listening to the minister yesterday, she said that as a result of some of the feedback and the concerns raised by residents, that they're now in two separate buildings. That's proposed now, right? That the proposal now has the complex care and supportive housing units in a different building from the non-market rental housing.
That was not my understanding of how the project layout was going to be moving forward. That amendment was not
Okay.
shared with us. But I will also say, I think we've we we've brought forward safe injection sites, and I don't think anybody at any point has looked at why this was even brought forward to begin with. And it's my understanding it was due to needles being shared when heroin was the drug of choice. But things have shifted, and I'm not against providing medical like needles and whatnot to people, but that's not why safe injection sites even came into play to begin with. So I feel like the province is adding band-aid over a band-aid over a band-aid without actually addressing the issues. It shouldn't take 3 to 6 months to get detox services, and
Okay.
that's probably a part of the issue, right? So we want people to get the help that they need, but that means they need to get the help that they need when they need it. And just having safe injection sites without having all those other services, and having a 3 to 6 wait time to get detox is not really helpful to the residents. It's not helpful to the people that are using, and it's not helpful to the families who have people who are using. I think we need to relook at how the province's policies are moving forward on this. And I think this is a application has allowed us to have a broader conversation about complex care within the city of Surrey.
Where do you think it should go?
I think it should be close to the hospital. It should be close to where they have healthcare, and I think it should be in conjunction with the detox center that should be available to someone when they're ready to make that step to step away from that life. I don't think it should be a place where people are residing and using drugs. So I'm all for providing people with the services they need, but they need to be within a Fraser Health unit, and it needs to have detox available for the people who are wanting that detox that same day. It shouldn't take 3 months to 6 months to get detox when you want it. And I think that's part of the bigger conversation that we should be having.
Okay, my guess is Surrey City Councillor Pardeep Kooner, and we're taking your calls on this after last night's vote at Surrey City Council. They essentially voted to send back a proposal to city staff. This was a proposal for housing located in South Surrey near the Semiahmoo Mall, and it included 200 non-market affordable rentals. And the City of Surrey says this city council says we support that, but we don't support these units that are complex care and supportive housing for people who have mental health or substance use issues. And so we're asking you, what do you think of that decision by Surrey City Council? And are complex care and supportive housing units needed in Surrey or other BC communities? Where do you think they should be located? You can call us now, 604-669-3733. 1-800-825-5950. Let's go to our first caller. We actually have a caller from South Surrey. Hi, Erica.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Thank you very much for calling in. And what do you think of the decision in Surrey?
I think it's short-sighted, and I'm quite shocked because there's a similar unit across the street or in that area done by Unity. It's called Harmony, and they're offering the same type of services. Mayor McCallum turned it down, and the new mayor and council approved it. And it's virtually the same sort of situation. What's the difference here? I think it's a huge red herring to be talking about drugs here. We're talking about mental health, yes, but not necessarily drug addicts.
Okay, let me just ask the councillor then. Erica, if you don't mind, stay on the line, and we'll get to your entire point here. But just on that point of why this project, why another project over this one. Councillor Kooner?
It's my understanding the Unity project, Harmony project, is for people with disabilities. and it's to provide people the ability to live on their own. So those are the type of services that will be provided there with that project. And the conversation during that time when from people from South Surrey was that they did not like the height of the building. It was that they did not want it 6 stories. They were happy with it if it was going to be 4 stories. So the conversation there was very different, and the topic was also very different.
Okay, and when we talk about supportive housing, we are also talking about housing for people who are vulnerable, who also live with various complex needs, including disabilities. And so, Erica, what apart from that point, then, in terms of the comparison between the 2 projects, what do you think of this decision and this specific project here?
Well, once again, they do have services, supportive housing in Harmony, and the waiting list is off the charts. We need more in this area. And again, supportive housing includes disabilities, and my nephew, for instance, would be able to go into the Harmony project if there were a spot. There isn't. And this new opportunity for him, he does require some help, supportive, but he's not a drug addict. It's a total misnomer here that we're talking about drug addicts getting in here. Yes, supportive care. Yes, complex care. You're spreading the focus elsewhere.
And given that it could also include services and housing for people with substance use issues, is that a concern for you then? Because that seems to be the concern that has been put forward by your neighbors.
Yes, is that going to happen? I think they can rule out people who have strong drug abuse issues. It's not about taking drug users off the street. It's about, perhaps the counselor can explain, are there any kind of guidelines as to what kind of people go in there?
Okay.
Yes, supportive, and yes, complex care, but not necessarily drug addicts who need. And by the way, there is a hospital right by there, so it's a perfect area.
Erica, thank you very much for your call. So again, concern there about the need for supportive housing overall, including for people who have disabilities in South Surrey. Jacob is calling us now from Victoria. Your thoughts on the decision in Surrey and the need for complex care housing?
Hello, thank you very much for having me. It is a complex subject, of course, and everybody doesn't want something in their backyard. But I want to talk about a couple of things that I observed down in Yakima, Washington, at a place called Camp Hope. It served complex needs, and yet even though it would be taking people who were did not have homes and mental health needs. They were housing about 200 people a night. But when I last talked to Mike Kay, one of the co-founders, they hadn't had to use naloxone for the last 8 months because they created a culture that was just absolutely different than I've ever seen before. They created a structure and a way of housing those that were difficult to house by creating a beautiful community. So you weren't taking somebody out of the community that they were experiencing on the street. You were putting them. It was called a safe place to start over.
Okay.
And they actually created that safe place with people going through the services and then end up working there. And they created a culture that was so engaging and so welcoming that that people would start to come, dip their toe, and sometimes they walk out the door. But instead of actually creating housing where everyone had their own space and lockable doors, which creates some problems when for monitoring, what they did is instead was just have a whole bunch of a lot of different spaces for different different needs and different
Okay.
genders, all that sort of thing. And so what they'd have the monitors walk through. There wasn't a place to hide drugs, and if somebody actually brought drugs on, all the residents would say, "Hey, no, that person doesn't belong.
Okay.
They're not part of this community."
It sounds like an
amazing.
interesting facility, Jacob. Thank you very much for the call from Victoria. I do need to wrap up here with Councillor Kooner. Thank you so much for being with us. So where does this go now? You heard the minister there say, we're willing to work with Surrey on this. It sounds like she still thinks you can move forward on complex care and supportive housing. So will Surrey work with the ministry on the potential for bringing back complex care and supportive housing to this project?
I think we would be willing to bring back some supportive housing and complex care separately within South Surrey. So I think they need to be two separate. Below market rentals needs to be one project, and we're willing to work with the province to bring forward another project if they deem fit to deal with complex care and with people who need wraparound services.
Good to have you with us. Thank you very much. We'll continue to follow this story.
Thank you.
Surrey City Councillor Pardeep Kooner. It's 12:27 now, and you're with BC Today. Let's take a couple more calls on this question of complex care and supportive housing units, and asking you if they are needed. Ben is joining us from Campbell River. Hi, Ben.
Hi there. How's it going?
Very well. And what are your thoughts then? Is it needed in Campbell River?
Yeah, so I believe that housing is a basic fundamental human right. I think when we look at the hierarchy of human needs, housing is sort of way down on the bottom and needs to be addressed before any sort of social issues need to be addressed. The problem, I think, that a lot of places, including Campbell River and Courtenay and mostly North Island, is that there are the facilities for people who are active in their addiction to live. Their wet housing is what they called. The tricky situation is when those people are ready to move on from their addictions and have jobs, the next sort of stage of housing, and that's where we're lacking houses. So we do have immediate shelter for people who are using drugs, but the people that want to get out of their addiction and want to, hold a job and have that sort of stability, there's no housing for them. So it's interesting to hear the councillor talk about, two separate issues when really it's one sort of complex issue that it does require a lot of services to sort of integrate these people back into society.
That is the concern, Ben. Thank you very much. The concern we've heard is that next step. So then where do you go once you have been able to get that immediate help? And it is short term. And let's take one more call here. Andrew, again, this is BC Today, and we are talking about this decision at Surrey City Council last night. Let's go to Andrew now, who's joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you today?
I am fine. And what are your thoughts then on this this project? And now Surrey says we want to go ahead, but not with the complex care and supportive housing units.
What are my thoughts? I work in the streets. I've probably interviewed thousands of people over the past couple of years in relation to this topic. The first thing is, yes, we need more places that support complex care. Like, we need to have people go into places and get them detox services, proper detox services. And from that, like the gentleman was speaking prior, there needs to be spaces for people to leave detoxes that are safe. Right now, people that need help that go to detox, if you're taking fentanyl or a hard drug like that, you're given methadone. If you go to detox because you're doing cocaine, you take Dexedrine. This is what the doctors are giving in the detoxes. If you're an alcoholic, you get another drug, kind of like an Abilify type of drug, and you're basically pushed out after 5 to 7 days from the detox. You leave the detox with no place to go. So they need to take these SROs where people are allowed to use drugs in them and maybe create some SROs that are completely abstinence-based places, and then help those people go from detox to there. I think the system's pretty broken. I've been sober for 29 years, I've worked in the fields for 30, but nobody's listening to me. So I'm grateful that I had this opportunity.
Well, we're great. Yeah, Andrew, we listen to you. I'm glad that I got to listen to you. Thank you so much for giving us a call. That's Andrew joining us from Vancouver. And in a few minutes, we'll go to Trevor in Richmond. I know who's been waiting to comment on this as well as we take more of your calls. And in a few minutes as well, we will talk more about housing, but this time what the housing crisis means for people who are trying to escape domestic violence, intimate partner violence. We'll hear about a recent report on that. Right now, it is time for the CBC News Update with Liam Britton.
Good afternoon. Vancouver police are investigating the city's 26th homicide of the year. A man was stabbed near Granville and Helmkin Streets. It's not clear what led up to the attack. The victim was rushed to hospital where he died. Police are still searching for a suspect. And Abbotsford police are looking into a shooting they say is related to an ongoing extortion investigation. It happened shortly after 3:30 this morning on Jansen Street. The APD says someone fired shots at 2 unoccupied vehicles in a residential driveway. No one was hurt, but people were asleep in the home at the time. And in the U.S., the House of Representatives has passed a bill to force the Justice Department to publicly release its files on Jeffrey Epstein. This follows initial opposition from President Donald Trump and Republican leadership. Trump now says he will sign the bill if it passes the Senate. Epstein was a well-connected financier who killed himself in a Manhattan jail while awaiting trial in 2019 on charges he sexually abused and trafficked underage girls. And now we'll look at today's BC weather. For the North Coast, showers, winds at times strong on the water, high of 7, and in the Peace, mix of sun and cloud, high of 5. Over in the central interior, sunny, high right around freezing, and for the Kootenays, expect showers, snow at higher elevations, and highs around 8. And much the same in the southern interior with showers, snows up high, up to 8 there as well. And along the south coast, cloudy most of the day, high of 9. And that's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Liam, thank you. That's Liam Britton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. You're with BC Today, and we're going to take one more call on the Surrey City Council decision when it came to a housing project, a proposal near the Semiahmoo Mall in South Surrey. And Trevor is joining us from Richmond. Hi, Trevor. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, hi. Well, I just want to point out that, like, Richmond shut down a 90-unit housing complex, and their argument was that they didn't want a concentrated unit of low barrier and supportive housing there, right? Because they're afraid of it congregating in an area. And then this was a 20-unit facility that was going to be integrated with general public. At least that's my understanding.
Yes.
And so we don't want a dignified way of, like, integrating them with the public, but we also don't want a concentrated unit. So you're saying you don't want to house them, period, at that point. So my argument here is, like, my question is just, what do these people want that are saying they want to stop it altogether? Like, I haven't heard any suggestions from the side on, like, what they would actually agree to. If you're doing this, then you're strictly saying that because these people have complex needs, they deserve to be placed through a carceral justice system, right?
Or I think the councillor said a location near a hospital, a different location.
I mean, if we moved it to a different location, I mean, that was the pitch, but we're stalling on the development of these projects. Same thing with Richmond. We're stalling on the development of these projects. I believe Abbotsford is also contesting one. Vancouver said they're just outright not building them. So it's like we have over 200 people that are homeless in Richmond. That's Richmond. There's thousands in Vancouver. And across all of BC, we have a massive homeless crisis because of the overvaluation of these condos and us renting them at outrageous prices. So if we're not going to move those markets, we need to talk about, like, what our actual plan is. And I don't hear people suggesting
Trevor,
solutions.
Thank you very much for your call. That's Trevor joining us from Richmond. What are the solutions and what are the alternatives? Thanks for all of your calls on the story, of course, around Surrey City Council and a proposed housing project there. We'll continue to follow it, of course. And our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. It is 12:35 now. You are with BC Today, and I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. Before we get started on this next segment, I do want to warn you, it will cover intimate partner violence. So if you or anyone you know is affected, there is support available through crisis lines and support services. You can find them online at the federal government's website. You can also go to Victim Link BC, and you can reach them at 1-800-563-0808. That's 1-800-563-0808. Well, a nonprofit in Vancouver has published a report that details how BC's housing crisis can worsen the challenges faced by victims of intimate partner violence. And according to it, more than 40 victims were interviewed by Rise Women's Legal Center. And it says the inaccessibility of alternative, safer housing has led victims to stay in abusive relationships or return to them after they leave. The report is called Should I Have Just Stayed? And it recommends changes in the legal system to better provide means for victims to escape abusive situations. We're going to hear more about that. We're asking you as well, what kind of housing is needed to support victims of intimate partner violence who are trying to flee? What are the resources needed there? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733. And you can also just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And if you're watching us on TikTok, you can leave a comment there. Right now, I'm joined by Hrymak, a staff lawyer at Rise Women's Legal Center. She's here with me in studio. Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. The title of this report is, it does just stop you in your tracks, right? Should I have just stayed? And for me, it's quite jarring to think someone's reconsidering that because of housing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So on behalf of Rise Women's Legal Center, I interviewed 48 survivors of violence in BC who have gone through some kind of family law process as well as experienced family violence and faced housing challenges. And over, what they described were the barriers they faced after they had left their abusive relationship really often put them in really dangerous situations. So people continue to experience financial precarity and housing precarity to the point that they wonder if they've made the right choice in leaving. And the title of the report, Should I Have Just Stayed?, it comes directly from a quote from one of the survivors I interviewed. And why it was so important for me to have that as the title is I heard that over and over again. So people within transition houses telling me that they aren't sure what their next step is and that they may have to return to the abusive relationship. It's not what they want to do, but it is potentially their safest option. We know that in BC, of the people who leave transition housing, because transition housings are supposed to be temporary, they aren't long-term solutions. Of the people who leave, 25% of people will go on to find some kind of housing, but only 4% of those are going to find safe, affordable housing. The other 75% of people are going to remain temporarily sheltered or return to their abusers.
Wow, that is a staggering percentage.
Yeah, and that's one of the big pieces of this report is we wanted to look at how we've known for a long time that family violence and housing interact with each other. People are facing higher rates of housing precarity when they've experienced violence. But what we really wanted to look at is where does family law come in? We know that there's many remedies within the family law system that are there to support people to get their legal entitlements. So thinking of child support, spousal support, division of property, you're leaving a shared family home, who's going to live there? All of those pieces are really family law questions. So our research focused on what are survivors' experiences going through family law processes when they're facing housing challenges.
Okay, so given that question, what are the barriers then?
Yeah, there's a lot of barriers. So some of the pieces are to get those financial entitlements, because we have to really consider that many abusers have experienced economic abuse within the relationship. And what that means is they're leaving often with very few financial resources, because within the relationship, part of the violence perpetrated towards them was that they weren't allowed to save money, they weren't allowed to access the joint accounts. All of those pieces makes it very difficult to leave and very difficult to pay rent and start at a new housing after you've left. So looking at how are people being benefited by the family law process to get child support? Well, the first thing they have to do is go through a court process. So going to court, we know, is very inefficient, it's very costly, it's very challenging. Even without hiring a lawyer, you're going to have to take the day off work. You're maybe going to have to take multiple days off work. And all of that does not necessarily mean that you're going to have child support deposited into your bank account next week. So we look at all of the pieces of family law that are there to help people and really look at what is actually happening, which is why speaking to survivors was such an important part of this project.
Okay, we actually have a comment here on TikTok which says so many people in BC are stuck in toxic relationships because they can't afford to move out. Yes, finances are such an integral part of that equation. So what is needed then? What changes are needed so that people can move on to permanent, safe housing and not be part of the 75% that lives in precarity or actually has to go back?
Yeah, it's a complex question with lots of various pieces that we are recommending could help improve the situation. So we want family law remedies to be seen as urgent emergency responses, that they really are. So if people don't know when they're going to get the financial support that they're entitled to, they do make decisions to stay in the relationship longer than they want to. So for example, there's a survivor that we discuss in the report who stayed 4 years longer in the relationship than she wanted to because she needed to save in order to be able to afford housing. So looking at these remedies really as urgent responses. So how can we make sure that people don't have to wait 2 years and spend thousands of dollars on a lawyer in order to get their entitlements? All of our recommendations really center around that. So for example, can we create a process in BC where child support is paid upfront by the government so that survivors are not put in the dangerous situation of having to go through a process where they're asking their abuser for money. We know that's really dangerous for people, and a lot of people will not do it as part of their safety planning. So shifting the burden and the onus on the provincial government to make those payments and for it to then be on them to go through the process of trying to recoup those payments from the payer.
Okay, let me take a call here now, and we are taking your calls on this as well. This report that's just been published by Rise Women's Legal Centre, it's a report that details how BC's housing crisis can actually worsen the challenges faced by victims who are trying to flee intimate partner violence. It's called Should I Have Just Stayed? And it recommends changes in the legal system to better provide resources and means for victims to escape abusive situations. And we're asking you what kind of housing is needed, what kind of resources are needed to help people fleeing abusive situations and intimate partner violence. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And thanks for your comments on our TikTok Live. As we continue this discussion, it is a sensitive one. Let me put out the number for Victim Link BC once again. It's 1-800-563-0808, 1-800-563-0808, and there are multilingual services available. And do take care as you're listening to this piece as well. All right, now Amanda is calling us from the interior. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Hi, thanks very much for calling in, and I know you have a story to share. How important is stable housing when it comes to fleeing a situation of intimate partner violence? Let's start with that, perhaps.
It's integral. It's integral. In 14 years, we haven't had stable housing. I've lost support systems. I've lost trust. I've been threatened. by neighbors, landlords, supportive housing units, advocates. I've been retaliated against.
What kinds of supports were available, or what were you trying to obtain that you haven't been able to in 14 years?
Well, I was denied income assistance for a few years because I had too many assets that divorce courts would not let me sell. Legal aid told me that they didn't do divorce, division of family assets, child support, or spousal support. Scattered housing would have been helped so that we weren't exposed to individuals dealing with drug addictions and abusive neighbors yelling and for hours next door. To date, I still don't know if I'm protected by the Landlord and Tenant Act. I've been stalked by a neighbor that lived in the building.
Okay. So that's how precarious it's been for you, yeah.
And my ultimate thing is that, in my opinion, after 14 years, we don't have professionals familiar with abuse and the impact on the family and the children.
Yeah.
So now, the system does not recognize that my children fled an abusive father, so they're struggling with their jobs and employment, and I'm having to financially support them to keep a roof over their head. And I now have a disability as a result of the lack of support I received. So it's major.
Wow. I know, Amanda, we're just scratching the surface of your story. There are so many elements to it that you've been through. Wow, I'm really sorry about that. And you've touched, though, on some very important things that I think, Haley, you can talk to, which is in terms of too many assets, not being able to get assistance. As well, that point about not enough professionals understanding or being familiar with abuse and the impacts of abuse on children.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amanda, for telling us a little bit about what you've been going through. I can say that I completely agree with you about the lack of understanding when it comes to violence. And that's something that we've detailed in this report, as well as in all of our research findings at RISE over the years, is there's a really big disconnect when we say the word violence and when people understand what that really means and what it really looks like. It's often understood to only be physical violence, but we know that violence has many different forms, non-physical violence, including economic abuse, psychological abuse, threats, is often seen as less serious. And within the legal system, this has really significant impacts. So people often are struggling to access remedies like protection orders, for example, when they don't have past experiences of physical violence. But what we know is that non-physical violence is very serious, and coercive controlling violence is a risk factor in lethality. So people are at most risk after they separate from an abusive relationship, and we must be looking at all the different types of violence that are going on for a person to truly understand what their risk factor is. And when we think about family law, we have to look at the whole picture of what violence has taken place in the past. What are the risk factors? And understanding, Amanda referenced, her children, understanding what's in the best interest for children in terms of making decisions about parenting time, where are people going to live, should they be allowed to move? All of these things really requires a really broad understanding.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you more about, I know that the Attorney General has talked about that, more training for the legal system when it comes to impact of intimate partner violence. I'll ask you about that in a moment. Just want to hear from Justin, who's calling us now from Burnaby. Hi, Justin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi there. Thanks for letting me call in. I wanted to highlight something that somebody had mentioned about, collecting child support ahead of time instead. So I actually grew up in this exact situation. Like, we had an abusive father. My mom eventually had to, we ran and she had managed to set up a small apartment in like crappy part of town. And where I'm from, Saskatchewan. That's where that went down. But nonetheless, she managed to like find a little 3-bedroom apartment that she could raise 2 boys in by herself on a single income. Like she never got child support from my father, who was like getting blood from a stone. She even tried to, like the premier of Saskatchewan tried to help her at one point obtain the child support from my father, who just kind of just disappeared. So the idea of making the government the person in charge of acquiring that would be huge. I honestly don't know how anybody in this situation now survives in this city. Like I think about them trying to find an apartment on a single income that would house a couple of kids. Wild. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, Justin, thank you very much, and thanks for sharing your story, your experience. Your thoughts on what Justin had to share, Haley?
Yeah, I'm just really grateful, Justin, that you called in and gave that example. And I think that you're very right that it's so hard now in Vancouver or anywhere in BC to really picture someone in a situation being able to leave without any economic support and find a 3-bedroom. And when people have, more than 2 kids, it's especially really challenging to be able to find a place that is suitable and appropriate for them. So yeah, I really appreciate that example of what you've experienced.
And that part of it really resonated with him. You made that comment earlier on in terms of providing that child support from the get-go.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the blood from a stone example is something, yes, that I've heard a lot. And people, are going out of their way often after separation. Abusers are often going out of their way to really make sure that there is no support given to the mother in many of the cases. And so that intentional withholding of the money that they know they're required to pay is extremely common. And right now, the burden on survivors of violence to try and get that money that they and their children are entitled to is just so challenging. It's also really, really dangerous.
Brad is our next caller now in Vancouver. Welcome, Brad.
Hello.
Yes, and what are your thoughts on what supports, what housing and financial and legal supports are needed for people fleeing intimate partner violence?
I'm a now retired executive director of a social service agency that did provide, or does still provide, second stage transition housing. We always had a wait list. And so my obvious comment is more resources are needed. If you really want to encourage people to leave dangerous situations, they have to have a place to go. And those are very limited. The other comment I'll make is when I first arrived at that agency, the policy in that transition house was that women with dependent children could come unless it was a dependent child that was a boy 16 or more years old. So that policy barrier meant that women with older teens, particularly boys, couldn't access service. So we changed that policy, but those kinds of things are the things that have to also be addressed.
Brad, it's very good to hear from you. A little bit of crackling there in the call, but we did hear your point. And thanks so much for sharing your experience, your expertise as having worked as an executive director of a social service agency. And your thoughts on that? So that policy, has that changed everywhere? Or?
Well, I can speak to transition housing, second stage housing, the wait lists, absolutely, and that we know that someone wanting to leave and access these services, there are wait lists, and often, depending where someone is located, there isn't any service. So depending where you are in the province, you're traveling a great distance to try and find a safe place to live. So we know that actually family and friends are often serving as emergency shelters for people, and or providing some kind of financial support. And so people who are helping out their friends and family are often providing these stopgap emergency services that without them, people don't have anywhere to turn to. And so the people who are very vulnerable to the wait lists and to not being able to access these services are people who are new to the area, who don't have any friends or family here. So people who maybe have just moved to BC, have just moved to Canada, all of these folks who are in a particularly vulnerable situation. And also part of coercive and controlling violence is often abusers use the tactic of isolation. So moving someone away from their family, moving someone away from their friends, and trying to prohibit them from relying on that support.
Good to hear from you once again. I'm going to squeeze in Constance and Chemainus. I just have a couple of minutes, Constance, but I understand you actually worked as a family court counselor.
I did. I was hired back in 1980 and worked under the Attorney General's ministry. I was working before there was any such thing as a maintenance enforcement program. And over time, I have come to realize that the program was ill-conceived in the beginning because, of course, you have to actually have something to enforce to make it work. And when people are leaving abusive situations, they often do not have any credit rating. They often do not have any court orders, and it takes an interminable amount of time to get one. And that is for either child support or spousal support or any division of assets. So that program is faulty and needs to be completely demolished and started over again.
Constance, thank you so much for your call. So again, that barrier that's put in place because you need finances to access legal services and an order, as Constance says. I have just a minute, Haley, but do you see movement from the province?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just add, Constance, that I totally agree that needing the order is the barrier. We have heard very positive things about when people do have the order. Many people are able to get it enforced. So that's a positive from the province. And just to add that we are really hopeful from Dr. Stanton's independent systemic review and all of the recommendations she made at the direction of Attorney General Nikki Sharma for that independent review. We're really hopeful to that over the course of the year that those recommendations will start to be put into place.
It's an important report. Thank you so much for detailing it for us and speaking to our callers. Good to have you.
Thank you so much.
That's Haley Hrymak, a staff lawyer at Rise Women's Legal Centre. Our email, if you'd like to send us your thoughts on this story, bctoday@cbc.ca.